youth evaluating programs for continuous improvement. First off, I just want to really thank everyone that is involved in this space and our partners and friends at Mentor for help putting this on, and all of you on the line who are working to improve the lives of young people in our country, and particularly for My Brother's Keeper Alliance, helping carry on a legacy that is deeply important to President Obama, to him and the First Lady, and that they have publicly vowed this would be a mission for the rest of their lives. So thank you all for being a part of that and helping carry on that legacy. Additionally, we have 3 more of these webinars coming up that we're going to be able to bring to our MBK Challenge communities. And just to update you all, and you will of course receive calendar invites for these to register. But the next one is going to be on Monday, December 5th, with our partners Strive Together, talking about building skills and competencies necessary. And that will be from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Additionally, we will have another webinar on Monday, December 12th, with our friends at Policy Link discussing community leadership for policy and systems change. And then our final one will be on Wednesday, December 14th, with Bloomberg Associates discussing a retrospective on the community challenge cities. And by last one, I mean in this calendar year. We are in the process of kind of revamping what we want to do next year in terms of different ways we want to engage this, or have some type of different platform that we want to display these. But those are coming up, and everyone will of course receive info about that. And lastly, just want to add that My Brother's Keeper Alliance, we just had our 2nd Opportunity Summit this week in Detroit, and it was incredibly successful. We had a little over 1,000 young men of color show up, and I believe last count was a little over 300 jobs offered the day of the event with our local partners and different corporations and businesses that helped lead the event hand in hand with us. So it was an incredibly successful event, and we have more to come in future cities such as Newark and Albuquerque. So be on the lookout for more things coming from us, and thank you all again for joining this call today. And as I said, my name is Seth Henderson, and now I'll turn it over to my friend Jennifer at Mentor.
Hi everyone, thanks so much, Seth. Thank you for inviting us to facilitate today's conversation. We're really excited to be here with you all. Today's webinar is titled Getting Results for Our Youth, Evaluating Programs for Continuous Improvement. My name is Jennifer Burgoyne, and I'm a program manager here at Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. And we're really excited to present today's content on how youth-serving organizations like yourself can use evaluations to continually improve programs and services. Like Seth said, today's webinar was designed out of a partnership between Mentor and My Brother's Keeper Alliance. We're collaborating to bring you best practices for building strong relationships and designing effective mentoring services. Today's webinar is the 4th in the past year or so, and we have another one coming up in December together. We've also collaborated on virtual trainings and a guidebook for mentoring boys and young men of color. All of the previously recorded webinars and virtual trainings are available via this link on the screen, and within the next week you'll receive an email guiding you to this website, which will also contain a recording and the slides from today's presentation as well. So as you've probably noticed, all phone lines have been muted for best sound. We find that on larger convenings like this one, there's often some unintended feedback. So all attendees are in listen-only mode so we can better hear our panelists today. We do want this to be a participatory experience, however, so please use that question box on your screen to ask questions throughout the webinar. I'll be reviewing those throughout the webinar, and I'll flag some to share with our panelists at the end of the presentation. We do have nearly 100 people registered for today's webinar, so we may not get to every question, but we will definitely try our best. Today's webinar topic arose from feedback from past webinars as well as input from our partners at My Brother's Keeper Alliance. Youth-serving organizations work day in and day out to affect change with young people, but we don't always know how well we're doing. Evaluations bring forth important information on how programs can improve operations so they're running at peak efficiency and providing the best possible services to young people. Today we'll delve into the different types and purposes of evaluations. We'll do a brief overview on logic models, and then the bulk of our presentation will be spent on process evaluations. And like I said, we'll end the presentation with about 10 minutes of question and answer. Before we get started, I wanted to do a little poll here to see where folks are currently at with evaluations. So let me pull that up. Okay, so hopefully you see it on your screen. Where is your organization at in terms of process evaluations? The options are unaware of what process evaluations are, which was me before this presentation, aware but not ready to try, ready to develop a plan for doing process evaluations, ready to begin doing process evaluations, or consistently doing process evaluations. I'll give you a moment here. All right, so it looks like we've got a diverse spread here on the line. We've got 39% who are consistently doing process evaluations, 33% unaware of what they are, and a 17% in the middle. So welcome to everyone today. Thank you. I think there'll be a lot of great information for everyone on the line. All right, so I want to start us off by introducing our wonderful panelists today. First here we have Nancy Deutsch, who is an associate professor at the University of Virginia's Curry School of Education and a faculty affiliate of Youth Next, the UVA Center to Promote Effective Youth Development. Her research focuses on out-of-school settings for adolescents and the role of youth-adult relationships in positive youth development. In addition, she has worked with multiple youth-serving organizations on designing and conducting evaluations of their work. She's the author of numerous peer-reviewed manuscripts and book chapters, as well as 2 books on after-school programs, Pride in the Projects, Teens Building Identities in Urban Contexts, and the co-authored Youth Organizations in Positive Youth Development, Case Studies of Success and Failures, which was the winner of an SRCD Social Policy Book Award. Her work has been funded by the William T. Grant Foundation, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the U.S. Department of Education. So welcome, Nancy. And next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Samuel McQuillin. Sam is an assistant professor at the University of South Carolina's Department of Psychology. He studies how schools and communities can work together to promote emotional, behavioral, and academic wellness in children who are environmentally or developmentally at risk. He's particularly interested in how theories of positive youth development can be applied to pragmatic real-world settings. He also serves as quantitative methodologist on a broad range of projects. He's a research board member of the National Mentoring Resource Center, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end of the webinar, the recipient of the 2016 Early Career Award for the Society for the Study of School Psychology, and the creator and director of the University of Houston and University of South Carolina's AMPED mentoring program. Dr. McQuillin's research has been funded by the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health, the Society for the Study of School Psychology, the Office of Minority Health, and Youth Serve America. So welcome, Sam. Alrighty, so I'm first going to kick things over to Nancy Deutsch for an overview of the landscape of evaluations.
Great, so thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I am happy to be able to be here and talk about evaluation with you all. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of sort of the types and purposes of evaluation broadly, as well as touch briefly on the idea of cultural competence within evaluation. So program evaluation is the use of systematic methods to address questions about program operations and results. So evaluation uses the tools of research to make judgments about programs, so whether they're operating as expected, whether they're having intended effects, etc. So in other words, evaluation is a specialized form of research that's intended to answer practical questions to help improve how we serve people, in this case, how we serve youth. Evaluation is somewhat unique in that it typically involves both learning and judging. So in research, we're often just learning. In evaluation work, we are judging as well. So we're evaluating the worth of programs. Is it working? Is it working well? But also, what we're going to focus mostly on here today, how is it working, right? That is it working well part. And we hope to learn how to make programs better and more effective. So although we often think of evaluation in the context of accountability, so in other words, we often think about evaluation as a way to prove to funders that our programs work, many people in the field of youth development have begun to focus on evaluation as a tool to help improve programs. So Dale Blythe, who's done a lot of work in this area, has called this moving from a prove to an improve model of evaluation. Rather than just proving a model works, a program works, let's find out how we can improve the program through evaluation. And that's what we'll be focused on here today, how you can use the tools of evaluation to improve your program. So there are 5 major domains that tend to be addressed by different kinds of evaluation. These were put forth by a major textbook on evaluation. And these domains you can see in front of you on the slides. The first is the demand or the need for a program, which looks at what the extent and nature of the problem is that the program is trying to address. So this is typically done before a program is designed, but we may sometimes need to return to this to think about whether our program is still needed. Program design, which is whether the theory that the program is based on makes sense. So can we expect the desired outcomes to result from the planned activities? Are the needed resources present? Are the assumptions on which the program is based sound? So for example, if we're doing a mentoring program and we say we want academic outcomes, are we doing any activities that we expect to lead to academic outcomes? Or is there theory that suggests that mentoring will lead to academic outcomes? It's linking the theory of the program to expected outcomes. The third area, which is what we're going to focus mostly on today, is around implementation and service delivery. So is the program being implemented as intended? The fourth is impact or outcomes. What are the effects of the program on participants? And that can be both intended and unintended effects. And then the fifth is the efficiency of the program, which is, are there things the program could be doing better to increase its efficiency in terms of things like cost versus benefit. And these broad domains represent a number of specified purposes that evaluation can focus on. And these include determining who needs the services of a particular program and whether those people are being served, which would be a needs assessment. Assessing the overall design of the program and strengths and weaknesses of its design in order to improve the link between activities and outcomes and improve the chances the program will achieve their objectives. Identifying areas of program implementation that could be improved, and this would be a process evaluation. Identifying key strengths and weaknesses of program implementation and building the skills of program staff to self-monitor and evaluate in order to improve the likelihood that a program will achieve its goals. Determining whether or not the program is producing the outcomes that it intends to, which would be an outcome or impact evaluation. And doing things like cost-benefit analysis, finding out if the program is worth it, and determining the overall value of a program to communicate this to potential funders and other stakeholders. There are 2 overarching types of evaluation in which programs can engage. So although there are these 5 domains, there are 2 basic types of evaluation, formative and summative. So formative evaluation is aimed at providing real-time feedback for program improvement. Its goal is likely to be program development and program improvement. So for example, a formative evaluation of match satisfaction might involve ongoing monitoring of match satisfaction through monthly surveys of mentors and mentees and use of that data to provide feedback to match support staff so they can assess the effectiveness of their support activities and adjust as needed. Summative evaluation, on the other hand, provides after-the-fact information about program performance. The goal is much more likely to be accountability and decision-making, although summative information can be used to improve programs that will continue to be implemented after the summative evaluation is completed. So for example, A summative evaluation of youth outcomes from mentoring might include surveying youth before and after a mentoring program and assessing whether any improvements occurred on key outcome areas following a year of mentoring. We'll discuss specific designs and the strengths and weaknesses of them later in terms of outcomes, but that is an example of what an outcome, what a summative evaluation might look like. Now, although you might think that formative evaluation is always about implementation and summative evaluation is always about outcomes, that's not always the case. You can use formative information about outcomes to make real-time adjustment to program activities. And Sam will talk a bit about that later in the webinar. And you can also use summative information about program implementation or fidelity to assess the quality of a program or help you understand why effects of the program were or were not found. There is a third kind of evaluation that's been gaining popularity that we're not going to talk about today, and that's developmental evaluation. But that is a type of evaluation that can be used when a program is still in its development phase and can help provide monitoring and feedback as a new program is being developed. So in line with the different domains that an evaluation can address, there are sort of specific types of questions that different types of evaluations can answer. So program evaluation should really be tailored to fit the needs of your program and the kinds of questions that your program needs to ask depending on where it is in its life cycle. So depending on the need and stage of your program, you might want to ask different kinds of evaluation questions. So a needs assessment will ask, what's the matter? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And that's likely very early when a program is being developed. An assessment of program theory is, how do we think we should fix it? And again, that's typically done early on in the development of a program, although you may return to that later in the lifespan of your program. An assessment of program process asks, is our program working like we think it should? Impact assessment asks, are we fixing the problem? And efficiency assessment asks, could we be doing this better? What kinds of questions your program should be asking really depends on what stage of the program you're in. So although we often associate the word evaluation with assessing program outcomes or impact, impact evaluations are, as I mentioned, only one type of evaluation and really most appropriate for programs that are well established and have already demonstrated a strong design and implementation. There are many different types of evaluations that meet different needs and answer different questions and require different methods. So the trick is to figure out what the right kind of evaluation is to meet your program's needs. So the next slide shows a table which illustrates this. So that depending on the stage of program development, there may be questions that are more appropriate to be asked. And as we move down this table from numbers 1 to number 8, we are typically moving through the life of a program, from development and early implementation through to long-standing programs with strong implementation and established effects. So when thinking about what your program evaluation needs are, you want to think about the stage of the program that you are currently in. When a program is early in its life history, a program theory or implementation evaluation might make more sense. As you become more established, outcome and impact evaluations may be better suited. Sometimes programs implement an evaluation that's not well matched to their current developmental stage, and that can wind up hurting them. So for example, if you conduct an outcome or impact evaluation too early in the life cycle of a program, you might not be testing the program as it was intended to be implemented. And you may not get outcomes not because the program doesn't work, but because it's not actually being implemented well or to high fidelity. So as noted, the different types of evaluation do follow a developmental path. And you could think of that as a progression. On the next slide, we move from left to right, from needs assessment down through to outcome evaluation. But remember that these are general guidelines, and sometimes it's useful for established programs that are further along in development to go back and think through evaluation questions from earlier stages. So for example, a mentoring program that's been serving youth in a local community for 10 years might want to revisit a community needs that originally prompted the program to see if they still exist, or to study the program implementation to ensure that there's not been implementation drift since the program first began. So think about the stage of program development you're in, and also consider when the last time was that your program considered some of the questions typically addressed earlier or later in the life cycle of evaluation to see if it would be useful for you to visit or revisit those questions regardless of your stage or of development. You also want to think about the audience for your evaluation. So for example, funders may have certain needs or requirements around outcome or expectations around outcome evaluations that other funders don't have. So sometimes private foundations require different rigor with outcome evaluations than government organizations or government agencies. The different evaluation approaches also differ in the complexity and rigor needed for their design. So different types of evaluation questions require different methods to answer them. Process and implementation evaluations tend to require studying the people in the actual program and often include a combination of methods of gathering data from staff and participants that we'll talk about later in the webinar. Outcome and impact evaluations tend to require more expertise to conduct. And if you really want to collect evidence that your program is causing positive changes in youth, you need a design that will allow for what we call causal inference. And you need to use measures that have been validated by researchers in the field. So although we're not going to go into depth on outcome evaluations today, I did want to provide you with a brief overview of the types of outcome studies. So you can see that there are multiple types of designs for outcome studies. Later in the seminar, Dr. McQuillin will talk about the feasibility, usability, and acceptability of your program services as something that can be looked at through what's called outcome monitoring. But to truly evaluate outcomes, you need particular designs, typically either experimental or quasi-experimental designs, that lets you see whether the program is really what's causing outcomes that you are seeing in your youth. So for example, if you just compare youth who sign up to those who don't, the outcomes you see may be a result of pre-existing differences between those youth, such as individual motivation or relational skills or family support that lead one youth to be signed up for mentoring and another not to be. We will talk a bit more about non-experimental methods of outcome monitoring later in the webinar. And then I wanted to briefly mention the importance of cultural responsiveness in evaluation. So there is a body of literature on culturally competent evaluation that focuses on the need for evaluators to be aware of and responsive to the specific cultural norms of programs that they're evaluating and the populations whom those programs serve. I'm not going to go into that work in depth, but in addition to that, my colleague Joanna Williams and I have written about the need for evaluators of youth development programs specifically to consider the role of race, ethnicity, and culture when conducting evaluations of youth-serving programs. I'm not going to walk through the details of this rather complicated model that you see in front of you, but just provide you the overview of it, which basically emphasizes that it's the interaction of individual youth-level characteristics with characteristics of the youth's immediate environment in terms of family, school, neighborhood, and peers, and larger societal level factors that come together to influence any individual youth's experience in a program. The program itself has its own sets of characteristics, including a culture, a set of activities, and relationships with adults in the program. No program can be expected to meet the needs of every individual youth, and different youth may have positive or negative experiences in the same program. It's also important to think about in relation to culture because in evaluation we often compare groups of youth, and sometimes we compare groups of youth based on particular social identities such as race or ethnicity. And while there may be reason to do this in some cases, it's important to remember that youth within any given racial or ethnic category are not homogeneous, and we can't assume that youth will all experience a program similarly just because they share a racial or ethnic background. Finally, it's also important to consider the measures you use in an evaluation in relation to youth's cultural background. So some measures or methods may not have been used previously with a particular group of youth from particular cultural backgrounds, or may not be culturally appropriate, may not match onto the cultural norms and expectations of the youth or their families that you're working with. And we will now move on to discuss logic models.
All right. Thank you, Nancy, for that great introduction, and also thank you to my Brothers Keepers Alliance and Mentor for having me be a part of this. So the purpose of kind of reviewing logic models before we jump in to some of the more specific ways that we assess process or we go about continuous quality improvements is we actually need to know what parts of the program or what parts of the program workflow we're going to be evaluating. If we can go to the next slide. All right, so this is probably some of the viewers are familiar with the basic logic model, where we go from inputs or our raw resources all the way to outcomes, or what we're trying to change in the community or in the youth that we serve. We typically view these inputs as resources or demands that produce some type of activities or things that we're taking. So let's start with inputs really quickly. So inputs are resources that are available to the program or agency, and they could also be demand that comes from the community, demands like concern about some particular problem like a truancy or crime, things like that. But they also refers to these raw resources like money or staff, leadership that's involved in coordinating the program. Could be software, if there's case management software involved, or consultants that are coming in, technical assistance, and so on. And when we're looking at these inputs, typically how we view the inputs is that these resources are used to produce some specific activities. These could be administrative activities, as you can see some examples right here in the logic model. They could also be program activities, the question of what do mentors do with mentees in this program. And these activities are the engine for what we expect the program to produce in terms of the products or services, which we'll talk about in a minute, or outputs, and then ultimately the outcomes. So activities are what programs do with those resources that they've acquired to bring about the desired goals. And again, these could be program-related, things that directly benefit the youth, or they could be administrative, things that are required to make the program activities responsible, things like fundraising and so on. So some examples that we'll talk about today when we get to process evaluation are, how we recruit our mentors, or how we go out into the community to get community partners or funding partners, how we train our mentors, what types of training curriculum might we have, how do we structure our meetings, what goes into those meetings, what do we expect mentors to be doing during those meetings, and so on. And then with these activities, we may have a specific training model, but we're interested in what this training model is intended to produce in terms of outputs. Outputs are typically things that are measured in volume or frequency, something that we can count or measure in terms of percentage points. And again, these outputs can span from the administrative side of the program, what administrators are doing to get the program running, to also at the mentor level or the program level of what's actually happening between mentees and mentors or other program-related activities. So the outputs are the direct products or services that are being produced by these activities that we're doing in our mentoring program. Sometimes you can measure these things in the amount of work or the units of service provided, the units of information collected. So you could look at things like the number of mentors being mentored, or the number of mentors that we recruited for the program, or the percentage of surveys that were completed for assessing relationship satisfaction or something. Could be the frequency of supervision that mentors are getting from their supervisors, or the match frequency and duration that we have. And presumably, if we have an expected level of output for what the activities are producing, the logic of the model, the reason why we think the model would work is that if these outputs are produced, then we would expect some outcomes that we designed the program to target. Things like maybe positive relationships or conflict resolution knowledge. Those are immediate short-term type outcomes. And then you can maybe think of intermediate outcomes might be things that happen concurrently with the program or shortly after the program has been delivered to youth. And then also things like long-term, things that happen after the mentor and mentee relationship has been resolved. So when we're looking at outcomes, Nancy spoke to this a bit, but typically in the logic model, the outcomes are things that we expect. And there's a number of ways that we can actually go about determining whether or not we're actually influencing the outcomes. But as Nancy said, that to really make a causal inference on whether or not our program is making change on these outcomes, we need to be conducting these very tightly controlled trials. Randomized controlled trials or things like that. But we're going to speak in just a little bit about how we can monitor outcomes through process evaluation to get an idea of if we're on target for producing the long-term outcomes that we might want. So again, some ideas for how we go about looking at knowledge, attitude, behaviors or beliefs from short to long. Short-term outcomes may be something like changes in motivation or reporting that you have a special adult in your life. These are things that we would expect to happen immediately when the relationship begins, or maybe concurrently while the relationship is going on. And then intermediate outcomes might be something that we think might take a little bit of time to actually make change on, things like decreasing disciplinary infractions or having general stronger relationships with non-parental adults. And then these long-term outcomes are what we'd expect that might take an extended period of time or might actually occur after the relationship has been closed.
Okay, so we're now going to move on and talk about process evaluation. Specifically, first, we'll talk about implementation and fidelity. So the goal of process evaluation is to understand whether the program is happening as intended and to identify strengths and weaknesses of implementation, the feasibility of specific practices and procedures, and areas for improvement. So for example, maybe your program assumes as part of its program theory that monthly match check-ins by program match specialists improve the retention rates for matches. But if those check-ins are not happening as planned or don't include the expected elements as designed by the program model, then you may not get the outcomes that you expect. So a process evaluation can help you monitor those check-ins and assess their frequency and content to identify areas for improvement. Process evaluation might also help you understand whether the theory that your program is based on is sound. When thinking about your logic model, a program evaluation is focused on these middle two sections that you see circled, the activities and the outputs. So there are sort of four major goals of process evaluation that you see before you, and these are the types of goals that a process evaluation can help you address. Process evaluations are also necessary for outcome evaluations, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So why would program process and implementation evaluation be important? There are different reasons that a program can fail, and before you measure outcomes, you want to understand if you're set up to be effective. So failure to understand the context and processes that cause the problem or issue that your program is seeking to affect is one potential area where your program can fail. In other words, the program may be based on a faulty program theory of change. So for example, if your mentoring program seeks to improve outcomes such as youth social emotional learning, but mentors and mentees meet in schools and focus on mentees' academic achievement and trajectories, there may be a mismatch between your program activities and the outcomes you're seeking. In other words, your theory of change might not be solid, and in that focusing on academics may not lead to changes in socio-emotional learning. The second of these is failure to understand how to translate the program theory into specific program components. So for example, building on the previous example, let's say that you've adjusted your program theory and you know that academic activities are unlikely to lead to social emotional outcomes. You adjust your program theory to focus more on general and developmental mentoring and away from mentoring within the academic domain alone. Yet you've not identified how to develop specific activities that reflect this new approach. So that could be a program failure. The last area is failure to properly implement programs. So to return to the previous example, you have the activities well designed, but the mentors aren't actually implementing them as designed. And all of these three failures can be addressed by a process or implementation evaluation that lets you look at how the program is working on the ground. So why evaluate implementation? This is important because evaluation and implementation are really just two sides of the same coin. Implementation is what happens in your program, and evaluation helps you look at what's happening so that you can improve it. In other words, process and implementation evaluations help you get inside the black box of programs and look at what's happening so you can better understand the presence or absence of outcomes. So as you can see, if you do an outcome evaluation where you simply look at the input and the output or outcome, you don't get to see what's actually happening in the program, and therefore you don't really know why the program is or is not working. there has been proposed the transparent box version, which basically opens up that black box that you saw in the previous slide. And I'm not going to walk through this model in detail, but the basic idea is that inside that black box of the program are a number of organizational and program level operations and processes, and that understanding outcomes really requires understanding what's happening inside the program, and that's what process evaluation lets you do. So in terms of thinking about the relation between process and outcome evaluations, if you're not achieving the outcomes you intend, but you've only looked at the inputs and outcomes and not studied what's inside the box of the program, you really can't determine if the program does or does not work, or whether the activities you intend to produce outcomes are not happening as intended. You can't improve a program if you don't know how it's operating. So these are a series of questions that process evaluations ask. Who is and is not receiving services? How aware is the population of the program? How are the program functions performing? Staffing and organization of the program? What are the other resources of the program being used? How are they being used? Are they complying with requirements? And are there differences between sites in terms of program implementation? And those are some of the more specific questions that process evaluations can help you ask. So why might you conduct a process evaluation? Well, they can help you achieve a number of goals, including accountability to program participants. So for example, to mentors, youth, parents, are you providing them with a program experience as advertised? You can also be accountable to boards of directors, to funders, and to external stakeholders. They also can be used for program improvement, helping you identify areas that the program content should be modified or program delivery should be improved. You can test your theory of change or logic model to increase your understanding of whether activities are linked to expected outcomes. And you can make real-time program adjustments. So when used in real-time process, evaluation data can allow for mid-course corrections to program content or delivery, such as improving future sessions for matches in a school-based program based on data gathered for those initial sessions. And you can also optimize the experience of individual participants. So process data can be used for monitoring and optimizing the experiences of participants in your program, such as whether a youth is receiving the intended types of support from his or her mentor. So to realize those benefits of an evaluation, there are three key concepts that need to be addressed in a process evaluation of any mentoring program. These are consistency, participation, and quality. So in consistency, it's really about adaptation, and the key question is whether implementation of the program is consistent with the model. So is there fidelity? Are the program components, for example, recruitment, training, match support, sponsored activities, being implemented as intended? You can find out by asking it's trickier than it seems, because consistency to the program model to a fault might not be ideal. So adaptations can be useful and beneficial at times. And one thing you can use process evaluation for is figuring out when and where adaptations are benefiting versus detracting from the success of the program. Participation, a key question in participation is to what extent each youth takes part in or receives the intended activities or experiences. This is both in their relationships with the mentors and, if applicable, in other areas. So for example, if there are group activities or workshops. And similarly, to what extent do the mentors and other key supporters of the youth experience in the program have contact? This information is ideally refined to address not just how much and how frequently activities and experiences are happening, but also when and where and what the quality of those experiences are like. And then the last key area is how well the program is delivered and whether the program is being implemented to a predefined standard or benchmark. So this quality question. It's one thing for part of a program to be implemented in ways that are consistent with the program's design. So for example, for match support to be given every month. But it's another to know that youth typically see their mentors twice a month, which is even better, right? Or not as good. Or what's left out from those kinds of consistency and quality information. So even if we know the frequency of what's happening, we really need to know how well it is being done. So how well is match support being provided? And what's the quality of the mentor's relationship with the mentees, particularly from the mentees' experiences? There are a number of different ways that you can assess program process, and these are a number of different sources of data that you can use in a process evaluation. A strong process evaluation generally includes both quantitative data, so this is data that can be counted or expressed numerically, and qualitative data, which is data that's narrative or descriptive. So the data you collect and how you collect it will be driven not only by your evaluation questions, but also by the availability or ease of access of the data and the resources that you have to gather it. So some sources of data for process evaluations include program records, and you can see some examples of those on the slide. Direct observations of program activities, and these could include observations of match interactions as well as group activities, support, or training. And then surveys and interviews. So surveys and interviews collect information directly from the program participants using a standardized format. They can be both close-ended and open-ended in nature and can collect both quantitative and qualitative information. You can develop survey or interview questions in-house, and that would be most appropriate when you're asking questions that are specific to your program's implementation. But you also may want to look at questions that from surveys with evidence of reliability and validity, and there are resources from Mentor that can help you choose and help provide you with examples of surveys that have been used by other programs in the field. Focus groups allow for collection of qualitative data from a small group of respondents, and they can be an efficient means of collecting information from multiple people in a short period of time, but it does require the use of a trained focus group facilitator to guide the discussion. No one method may provide all the data you need for a process evaluation, so you might want to consider multiple data collection methods. And finally, one potential end result of a process evaluation that we didn't talk about yet is helping your program operate at peak efficiency. Mentoring programs often are working on small budgets and trying to do a lot with a little. So a process evaluation can help you identify where there may be work that's lagging, staff that could be reassigned to better meet program needs, or gaps where issues need to be addressed. In short, process evaluation can help you improve your organization's efficiency by providing you with a detailed picture of what's happening in the day-to-day activity of the program and identifying targeted areas for improvement. And we'll now move on to talk about outcome monitoring.
So when we're looking at the process evaluation, a lot of the process evaluation activities are focused on those two middle elements of our logic model, the activities and outputs. But when you're conducting process evaluation, it doesn't mean that you have to forsake monitoring what your end game or what your goals are. So outcome monitoring is the process of keeping track of your goals while you're conducting process evaluation to see if your logic model is actually folding out in your mentoring programs. So the basic question of outcome monitoring are what are the immediate measurable outcomes that our program or training or event or software is intended to accomplish. So these are typically things that are short-term or intermediate, attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors that we can measure concurrently while the program is being implemented. If we're monitoring them, we would expect that they would change over time and that we could see them while the program is actually being implemented. So in outcome monitoring, it's typically phrased as progress monitoring. We're actually monitoring the progress of how the program is presumably producing effects on whatever behaviors, knowledge, or beliefs that we're looking at. Things like school absences, if it's a school-based program, or mentor knowledge, or mentee intentions. So a quick example, just to take a look at how we might go about this, is you can imagine if there's a mentoring program where the long-term outcome, maybe the funding is to increase college acceptance in a particular subgroup of children. What might be some outcomes that we could monitor as this program is being implemented, maybe far before any of these children would actually apply to college? Imagine this might be an early high school or middle school program. Well, fortunately, researchers have found a lot about what predicts college acceptance, and mentoring researchers have found some things that mentors may be able to help change in their mentees that could be related or logically related to college acceptance. So programs may choose to monitor outcomes like GPA or absences or practice SAT scores, whether or not the kids are applying to college or intending to apply to college, or how many applications they're submitting as they get later. Each of these things are outcomes that you can monitor concurrently while the program is being implemented without necessarily conducting an outcome evaluation. So you're less interested in the causal inference and more interested in what do we expect the immediate outcomes of this program to be, and are we actually hitting these? So with that, one of the things that we'd like to talk about with process evaluation is some specifics, specifically some definitions of how we would actually conduct process evaluation for our activities and outputs within the program. Now this discussion is sometimes confused in the literature where terms are used interchangeably, but we're going to talk about acceptability and usability broadly. And these are essentially how to measure and improve program operations by focusing on the end user experience. So usability is this idea that how easy something is to use or how difficult it is to learn, how time efficient it is, or how many errors it contains, or how pleasant it is to use affects whether or not people actually use or do what is intended. So this could be applied to any number of inputs or activities or outputs. So the user experience could be for a system that we're using, maybe like a workflow or a process, some technology like a software that we're using, or perhaps even a curriculum that mentors are implementing with their mentees. And acceptability is essentially the user's willingness to use this technology, curriculum, or process within their specific system. So it's context specific. Something that's acceptable in a school-based program that targets college acceptance might be unacceptable in a community-based program, or vice versa. Acceptability could be things like excitement or enthusiasm, how interested people are in the program, or how interested the curriculum or software seems to them. What their attitudes are like about the training, if the training is super boring or if it's really exciting and engaging. How motivated people are, if they've got things that are competing for their motivation, or if they have sufficient motivation to actually use the curriculum or the training that we're trying to get them to. It could also be things like how well they think the program works. So if a mentor thinks that the manual or the program that they're using is unlikely to affect their mentee's behavior, they're probably not going to use it. So acceptability looks at a lot of the dimensions of whether or not somebody is going to be willing to use a technology, curriculum, or process. So there's several different ways to actually get about measuring usability and acceptability. One popular and recent measure is actually a scale. So this is a scale that you would fill out. You can fill out paper and pencil or use it on some type of online collection form. This is called the Usage Rating Profile Intervention. It's developed by Amy Breach and Riley Tillman and colleagues. It's a brief 35-item scale. It's used to accept acceptability and usability of child interventions, focused largely on people that are implementing the intervention. So this would be, in our case, mentor program coordinators or mentors. And ratings on this scale are made on a 6-point Likert scale, where there's 6 options that range from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So in showing this measure, it's not necessary to advocate to specifically use this measure. I just think it's a good point in case to take a look at how would you actually go about measuring usability or acceptability for our various program activities or outputs. But a lot of the principles that are in the URPI could be extended to things like focus groups, other questionnaires, or in a lot of cases just casual conversation with mentors or program coordinators and other people that are affiliated with the mentoring program. And I'll show you some examples of how we could do that. So let's take a look at a couple of example questions for acceptability. And just as we're reviewing these, remember that you can imagine a mentor or a coordinator rating these on a 6-point Likert scale ranging from, strongly disagree to strongly agree. And things in parentheses in these examples are things that you could change out for whatever type of activity or element in your logic model that you're interested in assessing. So you can imagine asking the question, I would be excited to use this program or this software or this training. Overall, this program is beneficial to the child. That's getting at that, whether or not the mentor believes that this program will actually help the child that they're working with. You can imagine asking the question, this training would save time spent preparing our mentors, or you could rephrase that negatively and say this training would be a waste of time in preparing our mentors. It's important when you're coming up with questions or focus group ideas for this that you allow people to reflect both positive and negative aspects of the training. So you can specifically ask for those by asking things like, I would not be interested in using this training or technology or manual or whatever it is. Although those questions were taken directly from the URPI, you can imagine taking the ideas or constructs or concepts from those questions and creating focus group questions that you might meet with a group of mentors or administrators or stakeholders and ask things like, let's talk about some things that we're excited about with this intervention and then maybe some things that we're dreading or we're not so excited about. Or asking a mentor, tell me some things that you think might be helpful for your mentee with this curriculum, and then some things that might not be so helpful, or things that you might think are a waste of time. Or what are the biggest frustrations in implementing this case management software? What could be easier with this? So with acceptability, we could create an intervention that is highly acceptable, that people really like, that it looks nice and shiny, and that all the bells and whistles are on the technology or the process that we're using. But a key question is whether or not the end user actually understands or has the skills to implement the technology, curriculum, or process. So here are some example questions from the URPI that get at understanding. Things like, I understand how to use this technology. You can imagine if someone rated I strongly disagree, they might need extra help when actually understanding the technology, which would tell the program that, hey, we've got to do a better job providing technical assistance to our mentors in understanding this technology. Or for example, if you were asking your coordinators to conduct a new training, maybe on something like motivational interviewing, asking them a question like, I would know what to do if I was asked to coordinate this training. And again, with each of these type of questionnaires, we want to make sure that we give whoever we're asking an opportunity to report things that we may not want to hear, like things, I have no idea how to discuss these topics with my mentee, and so on. So you can also extend the concepts of questioning for understanding into non-scale extensions. You could, for example, create a test or a quiz that actually assesses whether or not the training produced new knowledge in the mentor or the mentee. You could actually have competency tests where rather than giving them a paper and pencil knowledge test, you actually see whether or not they have the skill to do what you've taught them to do. Or you could ask focus group questions like, tell me some things that are confusing about this workflow process or this technology or this, the concepts that we taught you in training. One example that I like to give when talking about understanding in the context of acceptability is the program that I developed, which is the UH and USC-AMPED program. This is a school-based program that's intended to be provided over the course of a school semester, and its goals are to motivate students in school, to equip students with some skills that we believe are necessary to succeed in the 21st century, and then support and mentor students as they set and pursue specific goals in schools. And how we go about this is we actually train our mentors in a counseling approach called motivational interviewing. This is an approach to have conversations about change that helps motivate people to make changes in their life. And what we found with this program is that we developed these, what we thought were great trainings, had very high acceptability ratings from our mentors for these trainings. In fact, a lot of mentors would ask to return to trainings even after they had attended one to go to it again. But one of the things that we missed when we were looking at acceptability was, do mentors actually understand what we taught them in these trainings or not? And what we found, what we knew, first of all, is that motivational interviewing is not easy. It's actually a pretty complicated skill that some people spend years learning and refining. Just to give an example, mentors that use motivational interviewing strategically use things like open-ended questions or verbal affirmations and reflective listening to encourage discussions about mentees changing their behavior. And despite all mentors being required to attend trainings, and despite all mentors or most mentors providing very positive acceptability ratings of the training, we found that mentors actually had no clue how to do motivational interviewing after they finished the training. In fact, if we would not have assessed for understanding, we would have just gone on and continued with the training, realizing that when our mentors go out, they may have gotten training in motivational interviewing, but they are still doing the things that we told them not to do, things like arguing or giving unsolicited advice, and they weren't doing the things that we wanted them to do, things like providing reflections or exploring the mentee's own reasons for change. So what we did when we assessed for understanding in this is we realized that our training had to be pretty radically revised, and because of that we made some pretty significant changes, and now we can confidently say that our mentors are actually using motivational interviewing because we changed the training to help them understand this better. In addition to acceptability and usability and understanding, there's this idea of feasibility. And the feasibility is whether or not the user has the resources necessary to actually implement the intervention. So this might not be skills or knowledge. This could be user demands, things like time or energy or ability, or if they've got competing demands that are fighting for their time when they're trying to implement this intervention. And if something is not feasible, it just won't be done. So the URPI has some really good questions on feasibility that could be extended to mentoring programs, things like the amount of time required for record keeping. You could imagine they'd be mentor notes is reasonable, or you could word it negatively as unreasonable. The program could be implemented in its entirety within our timeline, which is really important for programs like mine, which are school-based mentoring programs, and we typically have to hit all of our timelines in order for mentors to get a full cycle of the relationship within the school year. You can imagine questions about if implementing something would disrupt the prototypical workflow of an agency. It sounds like a really great idea on paper, but if we were to implement this, would we actually be able to continue our routine processes? And the final dimension that I want to get at for looking at acceptability and usability is this idea of system support. System support is the notion that how much extra help would we actually need to implement this technology or curriculum? So again, something may sound like a really great idea, but when we get it, we realize that there's a lot of stuff that's in the margins that we haven't thought about, that we may need extra support from administrators for. We may need consultants that we hire and bring on, or we could have some technical assistance that we need to get to actually get the software running. So just some quick examples before we finish up this and go to questions. Examples for system support would be something like providing ratings on conducting these trainings would require support from my coworkers. This isn't necessarily something that I could do myself. I would need extra help to actually do this. Or I would need support from my administrators to process these mentor applications. This isn't something that in my regular workday I could actually do. You might imagine querying for system support before we actually add a new job to someone that already has an existing job. Or in a lot of programs that involve parental collaboration, you might ask how essential is that parental collaboration? And you can imagine asking a system support question, something like parental collaboration would be required for this program to work. And if that's the case, what are our typical records for getting parents involved in the program? Is this actually feasible to do, or is the system support too much of a demand on the existing program? Or finally, before we go into questions, would we need consultative support to actually implement this program?
Great. Thank you so much, Sam and Nancy, for your presentations. We've gotten a bunch of great questions, and I'm trying to consolidate some of them. So this first one is kind of a layered question, so if you need me to repeat it, I can. But someone said, we're always trying to incorporate youth voice into our programs, and I'm wondering if it'd be appropriate to involve young people in our process evaluation. Should they be asked how the program can improve operationally? How old should kids be to participate if they are? And how can evaluations be modified for younger kids?
If I could take a stab at that really quick. Okay. Was someone else speaking?
Oh, no, go ahead, Sam. It was just me, but go ahead.
Okay.
You jump in, or so, and I'll jump in.
I'll just give you a quick example of how we've actually used it. I think to answer the basic question is yes, I definitely think that mentees could probably be the most valuable voice in improving mentoring relationships. So actually some of the biggest changes that we ever made to the AMPED program that I coordinate were from mentee suggestions about, you know, how engaging the sessions were that they're having with their mentors, what they liked or didn't like about the program. Even things that I thought were small and insignificant, they brought to my mind. So like one example is that one of our logos was 2 little red book bags that we had on t-shirts and manuals and handout materials, and one of the book bags was smaller than the other book bag, intended to signal that we had a mentee and a mentor. But we had several kids in different focus groups tell us, like, hey, we don't like the idea that our book bags aren't equal size. We want them to be equal, not have one that's bigger than the other one. And, you know, we changed our logo because of that, because that seemed to be something that kids would independently pick up on and report. So I think that that's a really insightful question and spot on. I think we definitely need to be including kids in these type of conversations. So I know that Nancy was trying to talk too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think you can think about the kids in 2 different ways, right? So you can think of them as providers of information. So like you do, I've done interviews and focus groups with kids from mentoring programs, right, or surveys. But you can also think of them as even helping you figure out what questions to ask. So I've also done what are called sort of youth participatory evaluations. I'm actually working on one now with an after-school program, and I did a previous one with an after-school program where the kids are actually involved in helping design the evaluation, right? And they're actually helping sort of identify what are the questions that are important to them as regular users of this program. So there are really, I think, wonderful ways of thinking about how to incorporate youth voice into your evaluations. And I would say that really you can go down, you know, pretty young. I mean, I've worked with, I guess I haven't worked with youth that young. I've worked with youth probably as young as about 5th grade. And had youth, you know, involved in focus groups and things like that. But, you know, pretty much I think from mid-childhood onward, there are different ways you want to adjust the kinds of questions you ask and how you involve youth in these activities based on their age, obviously. But as long as you're sort of thinking about adjusting the methods appropriately for youth of different ages, I think you can bring a wide variety of youth voices in.
Great, thank you both. Next question, this one's for Sam. Someone said, reflecting back on your experience teaching motivational interviewing, how did you determine if the skills stayed with the mentors? Did the skills stick past the training test, and how did you know?
That's a great question. So one of the fortunate aspects of working with motivational interviewing is that there's a really strong and thriving research community outside of mentoring, and they've developed a lot of really objective measures of how well someone is doing motivational interviewing. So there's a measure called the Motivational Interviewing Treatment Integrity, where you actually record conversations, and you can code motivational interviewing consistent and inconsistent behaviors. And how we did that is we conducted a series of pretty extended case studies with different types of mentors, ranging from school administrators to college student volunteers to students in counseling programs and so on. And we actually measured, following the training, while they were actually meeting with their mentor, how consistently they engaged in conversation that was motivationally interviewing consistent versus inconsistent. And essentially what we found is that regardless of which background you come from, the best way to learn motivational interviewing is to practice it and to get feedback on how well you're doing, to record yourself. So in addition to learning, you know, how to assess this in terms of our evaluation, we actually used the treatment integrity measures to help give mentors feedback on how well they're using these type of skills. And we've actually, one of the things that we've realized, really interesting question that you had, is how do we know that they're continuously doing it? And what we found is that they typically won't unless you provide ongoing support and encouragement. You're prompting them pretty frequently, because most mentors don't have, you know, months of their life to dedicate to training. So we have short little videos that they can watch on their mobile phones or tablets that demonstrate key components of motivational interviewing, things like providing double-sided reflections or reinforcing change talk, and they can watch these in 2 or 3 minutes right before they jump in their session to get a refresher. But again, it's challenging because of exactly what you said, is that we don't just want them to do this on the first or second session. We want them to keep doing this throughout the session. So I hope that that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And this next one is for you, Nancy. Someone asked, where can we learn more about cultural responsiveness in evaluations?
Oh, great question. So I think the citation for the article that I wrote with my colleague, Dr. Williams, is on the slide, and we do cite a number of things, a number of resources with that. There is also a literature. Let's see. There is. Oh, I'm forgetting his first name, but last name is Hood, who has written a fair amount about culturally responsive evaluation. And you could also look at, there is an American Evaluation Association, and they have a website that has resources on it. I haven't looked recently. I don't know what they have on there specifically about culturally responsive evaluation. But if you can't access, if you don't have access to some of the writings from the field, I think that's a public space that has things written about different types of evaluation and different resources. I'm also happy to share the article that I wrote with Dr. Williams, which has a number of other references in it to the field of cultural competence and evaluation.
Yeah, that'd be great, Nancy. And if you want to send me that link, I can send it out in our follow-up email too, so folks have that.
Happy to do that.
Great. And I have one or two more questions here. Someone said, I know it's important to do pre and post surveys when measuring outcomes. Do we need to be thinking about pre-surveys with process evaluations too?
So that's a great question. I think it really depends what the goal is for your process evaluation. If it's really just about monitoring and improvement, it can be helpful if you're going to look at outcomes as part of the process evaluation. It certainly can be helpful to have a baseline, right? To know, are people changing from where they started. But I think what you really want to think about in terms of the timing and the best use of resources for a process evaluation is what is the most important information for you to get to improve the program. So if the kinds of improvements that you want to make are linked to knowing whether or not there's change happening, then yes, you want to be doing sort of pre-surveys or pre-tests or assessing outcomes early on. But if it's really about is the program being implemented, then it's not about surveying outcomes or doing pre-tests. It's really about focusing on using your resources to study the activities of the program and how they're being implemented. Sam, do you have anything to add to that? I don't know.
I think that's a great question. I think that, just to kind of dovetail on your response is that, it's a great idea to measure pre and post. If you have something that you would expect is going to change over the course, as a product of the intervention, some type of outcome. But I think that, like you said, in process evaluation, a lot of this stuff is continuous monitoring, not necessarily pre and post, but monitoring it on a regular basis to see how well we're implementing the intervention over time. So it wouldn't necessarily be how well it happens before and then how well it happens after, but what's the complete picture of implementation. And a lot of times this might not be scales necessarily or measures like that. It could be objective things like meeting times or durations, things like that.
Excellent. Well, I think we're going to leave it there for the questions. So thank you both, and thank you to everyone who wrote in those great questions. Before we wrap up, I wanted to briefly mention some additional resources that may be useful as you review your own evaluation plans. We encourage you to get no-cost technical assistance for your mentoring program. Whether you need help with recruitment, planning, program design, evaluation, or anything in between, you can request free technical assistance through the National Mentoring Resource Center, which is a resource funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention and facilitated in partnership with Mentor. Wherever you are in the U.S., the NMRC is there for you. And the NMRC also has a couple great evaluation resources. I'd highly recommend the Measurement Guidance Toolkit for Mentoring Programs, which provides recommended instruments for measuring key youth outcomes. And additionally, if you're a mentoring program, we encourage you to register your program with the Mentoring Connector, which is a national database of mentoring programs. This zip code searchable database allows mentors and mentees from across the country to find your program, and it's connected to some great campaigns with LinkedIn, My Brother's Keeper, MBA Cares, and so many other great avenues of free program advertisements. In the next week, the mentor team will load this recording and the slides to our website, and you'll receive an email that includes a link to access the webinar recording and slides via that website. The website also has all of our prior webinars and virtual trainings and guidebooks with MBKA, so I hope you do visit that site. And that is the conclusion. So thank you all very much for participating today. We were really happy to deliver this material to you, and thank you so much to Sam and Nancy who donated a lot of time to work on this webinar. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend ahead.
Thank you.